Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I am away for the last 3 days of my summer vacation, and Ed Morrissey has been kind enough to drop in again from Texas, where it's, I think, 140 degrees, and sweat a little bit in his studio down south. He goes to it's the Dorn of the studios as opposed to the Winterfell of the studios where I'm hiring out. Go for it. Go for it. Thank you, Edward, for coming in.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here in Texas at the ReliefFactor.com studios, which are cooler than the other side of the pillow. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Welcome back, everyone. Got a great show for you today. We're going to have all sorts of great guests here. Salena Zito is going to drop by, King Banaian, Brian Wesbury, Francis Rocca, all the way from the Vatican. We've got lots to discuss today. Right off the top, though, let's go with probably the biggest news story of the last couple of days, which is the mass shooting in Highland Park, Illinois. And what we're finding out now about the shooter, now that he's been arrested and he's been charged, we're finding out that there were certainly red flags about this particular shooter. And not only were there red flags, but they took place in a red flag law state, which apparently nobody bothered to use. Now, this is, we're going to hear a lot about this case in terms of the gun law that just passed. The gun law that just passed provided financial incentives for states to set up various different programs to deal with potential threats, including red flag laws, although not exclusively red flag laws. And this is a case where you would have expected these types of laws to apply, and in fact, they were actually available. Let's take a listen to cut number 19 from the police presser yesterday.
State police. What was the follow-up from state police at that point? And was there any monitoring given what had happened of those social media accounts then? And should there have been?
Do you want to speak to that?
My name is Master Sergeant Delilah Garcia. I'm Public Information Officer, Deputy Chief. So basically in September of 2019, ISP did receive information from Highland Park Police Department, and at that time, the individual named in the report did not have a FOID card or anything to revoke or to review. So at that point, that FOID part of it was our stance on that.
And there was nothing done to say this person shouldn't be able to get. Is there any FOID card in the future? Is any action like that taken?
Well, at that time, basically, so he didn't have a pending application, so there was nothing to review at that time when we got that notification. We didn't know, and a few months later, something else would happen.
What would state police have to have done or have to have seen in order to try to involuntarily commit someone based on those facts and those things?
Involuntary commit someone?
Right. So the lead came.
So what was revealed in this, I'm not sure that this really came across very well in the clip, was that police were called to Robert Crimo's house twice in 2019 based on threatening comments that he was making. In one of those two visits, police removed 16 knives, a dagger, and a sword from Crimo's home, but they didn't have probable cause to arrest him. Now, they didn't have probable cause to arrest him, but they removed 16 lethal weapons. None of these were firearms, apparently. 16 knives, a dagger, and a sword. This had to do with threats that he was making at the time, at least some of which were for self-harm, and some of them were harm to others. So there was very clearly something going on here. I mean, if you go once to somebody's house, that's one thing. If you go a second time, that's a sign that there is an issue going on here. He had 16 knives. He wanted to kill everyone, according to the quote, and had previously been suicidal. He was in the 18 to 21 year age bracket, which is an age bracket now of increasing concern when it comes to potential for mass shooting incidents. And Illinois has a red flag statute, and it doesn't require some states law enforcement can't issue the red flag law. And there's good reasons for that in terms of protection of constitutional rights, but Illinois is not one of those states. Illinois is actually not a great state when it comes to gun rights anyway, but in this particular case, law enforcement can initiate a red flag petition. And that law enforcement that responds to these can allege that a respondent poses a danger of causing personal injury to himself, herself, or another by having in his or her custody or control, purchasing, possessing, or receiving a firearm. If you're called out to the same house twice because a guy is threatening to kill everyone, and you've had to remove 16, knives, daggers, and a sword from this person's residence, that should have been enough to trigger the red flag law that would have prevented this particular person from purchasing a firearm. Now, I'm not blaming law enforcement for the mass shooting. That's not my point. My point is, though, that if you're talking about putting in red flag laws and thinking that it's going to stop these incidents, it might in theory, but only if law enforcement is using those tools and the family around these people are using those tools to make sure that this person can't get get their hands on a firearm, at least legally, and this suspect was able to purchase this legally. And to underscore the point about the family, my understanding is, and I'd have to double check this to be clear, but my understanding is that the family, or a member of the family, I think it was the father, assisted this guy in purchasing that firearm. And later on, Fox News talked to the suspect's uncle, and that's cut number 20, to find out what the family knew about this. Let's listen to cut number 20.
At times, and there was no signs of trouble. I saw no signs of trouble, and if I did see signs, I would have said something, but there was no signs of trouble.
What was he doing with his life? He was 22. Was he going to school? Was he working?
I think he was out of he didn't go to college, and he was like a YouTube rapper that I know, but I never even previewed his videos at all.
Yeah.
I just know that he's on YouTube.
So he was trying to do rapping and
yeah, he's a rapper, and then he was also an artist. He was a good artist a while back.
Was he professional? Was he getting paid for it?
No. He drew good.
Did he have a job?
At Panera Bread, he worked from maybe 2 years ago.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah,
but he'd been unemployed.
Right.
And no mental problems or psychological problems in the past?
Not that I know of, no. He's a real quiet kid. He keeps everything to himself, and he doesn't express himself out. So he just sits down on his computer, and there's no interaction between me and him.
And having.
Now, again, I'm not blaming the uncle for what happened here. That's not the point of this. But clearly there's blinders on when it comes to the family here. The police were called out to this kid's house twice. They confiscated all his weapons one of those times. He was threatening to kill everyone. That's a pretty clear sign that there's something going wrong with this kid. So, I mean, the idea that, well, we didn't see anything going wrong, there were no signs. There were plenty of signs. And so the bottom line here is that if you're going to have these types of laws, if you're going to rely on the idea that background checks and red flag laws are going to work, you have to have people who are willing to use those laws in the first place. And I think that there are plenty of opportunities for abusing the red flag process. There was a lot of discussion about domestic violence accusations, mutual domestic violence accusations, how that could tangle up somebody's constitutional rights. This is not one of those situations. This is a situation where law enforcement had to be called to intervene twice on behalf of somebody who was 18 years old or older at the time, who was threatening to kill everyone and had accumulated a number of edged weapons, apparently for that purpose.
I was under the understanding that the left wants to confiscate weapons, and if we just took in guns case, if we just took the guns away, we wouldn't have mass murder anymore. We wouldn't have mass events anymore. We confiscated this guy's weapons, and he just chose to.
Once.
And he chose to get a different weapon.
and they chose not to prosecute. They chose not to process this. I mean, again, the police intervened enough to take the weapons away, but didn't intervene enough to refer it to a committal or to refer it to prosecution, either of which would have also stopped him from being able to legally purchase the firearm that he used in Highland Park. I mean, it's very frustrating. The bottom line here is that if you're going to pass laws, you better start enforcing them. Otherwise, you're never going to get the benefit that you seek from them. I'm Ed Morrissey from Hot Air. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show, where disco lives forever. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today, and always enjoying the bumpers. Adam does a great job at getting the best music ever for the bumpers when I'm guest hosting. He does an awesome job. We're talking a little bit about the gun control issue in the wake of two mass shootings, actually, on July 4th. The second was in Philadelphia, and the mayor of Philadelphia weighed in on that. Let's go to cut number 17.
If I had the ability to take care of guns, I would. But the legislature won't let us. The U.S. Congress won't let us. The governor does the best that he can. Our attorney general does the best that he can. But this is a gun country. It's crazy. We're the most armed country in world history, and we're one of the least safest. So, until Americans decide that they want to give up the guns and give up the opportunity to get guns, we're going to have this problem.
So my understanding is that they still don't have the suspect in custody. They're looking for the suspect in the Philadelphia shooting, so we're not sure. We don't know what the situation is with that. I believe two police officers were shot in that one, and this was at the 4th of July celebration. I suspect that if you've got somebody shooting at two police officers, probably that person is going to wind up having some sort of history of interaction with law enforcement, but we don't know that for sure. We'll know that for sure once they identify the suspect, once they're able to arrest the suspect, identify him, and find out what the circumstances are. But clearly the one in Highland Park did have a history with law enforcement, and in response to Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney, confiscation was tried there, right? The issue wasn't confiscation. The issue was the fact that they didn't prosecute him or put him through a committal process or even attempt to use the red flag laws that have been on the books in Illinois now for several years to make sure that this person didn't do harm. And again, if you're going to have these laws on the books, you have to be able to use them. I mean, this to me is not the it's not at all an issue of what everybody else is doing with their guns. It isn't the fact that guns exist. There was I forget in Europe, I believe it was it in Holland or Denmark, where they had a mass shooting at a shopping mall there, and they don't have a whole lot of guns in those countries there, but it still takes place. And it's a mental illness issue, usually. And it's usually a situation where you've had somebody who's already had some interaction with law enforcement where there's already been a threat identified. And we've seen this over and over again. We saw it in Uvalde. We saw it in Parkland. And we saw it at Shady Hook, for that matter, as well, where you had perpetrators who had come across law enforcement, had been dealing with them in the past. They had been problems. And nobody wanted to prosecute. Nobody wanted to put a black mark on a kid's record in order to deal with the situation that eventually disintegrated into a mass shooting. So passing more laws and restricting law-abiding gun owners isn't going to solve that problem. I mean, it's almost a non sequitur. And it's also a utopian non sequitur, because there's no way that you're going to take away... I don't even know how many firearms right now. There's 60 million households in the United States that own a firearm. How are you going to confiscate firearms out of 60 million households? And on what purpose? On what grounds? It's not just the legislature that's not keeping Mayor Kenney from dealing with it. It's not just Congress that's keeping Mayor Kenney from dealing with it. It's also the United States Constitution. We have a right to keep and bear arms because we have the right to self-defense. That is an inherent natural right for all people. And the fact that other countries don't allow for that's on other countries. For the vast majority of our existence in the United States, that right has been robustly exercised without any of these issues coming up. So clearly there's some other issue at play here, and it's probably cultural. It relates to mental illness, none of which is going to be solved by gun confiscation. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by The Matter of Life and Salem Now.
Joe Biden wants to turn the beat around. We're going to get back to that, actually, a little later in the show. Joe Biden would really love to turn the beat around. I'm Ed Morrissey from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Central Texas, where it's cooler than the other side of the pillow, no matter what you've heard. That 102 temperature high that we're going to have today, it's totally cool. It's great. You'd love it. By the way, speaking of what you'd love, later on tonight, I'll be on The Universe in Dwayne's after show, and you get a chance, if you're a member of the Universe, to sit and watch me, see if I can manage to stay awake tonight while Dwayne and I talk about all the other developments that happened after the show's end today and this evening. Dwayne, what are the current odds of me staying awake?
It's just about 50-50.
Yeah, 50-50. See, you got to tune in. You got to find out this
And you
stuff.
wouldn't be the first person to fall asleep on me.
That's not true. You got to be a member of the Universe, though. HUGHNIVERSE.com, the troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt fans and listeners. And Dwayne does the after show, I think, almost every night during the week.
I could actually test that theory to see if you'll fall asleep by playing Kamala Harris cuts to you.
No. That's. I think that you have to find somebody who's not actively annoying. I think we're going to play some Kamala Harris cuts here in at least one in just a second here. But I've got bad news for Joe Biden in trying to turn the beat around here, and we're going to have more on this, like I said, later. But Politico has a piece that just went up about the Highland Park shooting in the. And the Philadelphia shooting, saying that Biden's response Monday to the mass shooting at the 4th of July parade seemed flat to many Democrats. And there is fear that the piecemeal bill, this is the bipartisan bill that Chris Murphy and John Cornyn worked and Joe Biden cheered, didn't just sap momentum to continue addressing gun violence, but was already giving cover to Republicans. And this is the quote here. He's missing the boat here. This is our time to dig in and be absolutely furious because these one-half measures are not working. He's got a real excitability problem, says Camille Rivera, Democratic strategist and partner at the progressive firm New Deal Strategies. Our rights are being infringed upon. And there were 2 shootings, another in Philadelphia, on the exact same day that people are supposed to be celebrating their independence. I really don't understand where this passivity comes from in this situation. So, Joe Biden normally has no problem doing the old man shakes fist at clouds routine. Apparently not enough for Democratic strategists. I am curious as to how that is going to work out for a guy. I guess what they're arguing is that he really should take that 38% approval rating and take it out in the road and see what it can get, Dwayne.
Oh, he's down to what? 36 in Monmouth, but
36 in Monmouth, 38 in Harris, Harvard Harris. Yeah,
you've got even celebrity actress lefties like Deborah Messing from Will and Grace, and they're saying, but the president's not doing anything. He's not championing our issues. He's not fighting hard for us. It's almost like, what's the point of voting? Says these Democratic activists.
Deborah Messing says she's the one who got Biden elected too, by the way, just to let you know where that's coming from.
No, actually, Donald Trump got Joe Biden elected.
Yes. But we digress. We're going to get to some of Biden's other polling woes, but I find it interesting that on this specific issue, they're really angry because he hasn't done enough. And this is just like a few days after the White House was celebrating the fact that they got gun legislation passed at all, and we're ready to take credit for being responsive to the earlier shootings, even though really nothing in this bill, other than maybe the red flag law and the mental health aspects of that bill, address the issues at hand.
Well, they did have some funding to harden targets, harden
that's true.
Schools,
right?
Right.
But I mean, yes. So for that particular target, yes, there was something about that. But when you're dealing with the issue of having these disturbed people getting access to guns and shooting places up like parades, I mean, the mental health funding in that bill is a start. The red flag law incentives are a start. But again, if you're not going to enforce these laws, it's pointless. It's an exercise in futility if you pass these laws and then don't use them, don't prosecute, don't commit, like apparently what happened here with this shooter from Highland Park and Uvalde and Park. I mean, we can go on and on with this. It's not that these people haven't had come across law enforcement before. It's that people haven't pressed the issue and gotten these people either jailed or in some sort of committal situation that would preclude them from being able to purchase firearms in the future. Anyway, the idea that Joe Biden just hasn't been radical enough on gun control is not a surprise. I mean, I don't consider that a surprise, but it's yet another instance where Joe Biden isn't making anybody happy, and that's another function of being a 36% approval president. Not the only silliness, though, that we've heard. Let's go to Joe Biden's erstwhile successor here, Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, who wants you to know that she's serious. She's seriously serious, and she's serious about Seriously, she's serious about making sure that you know that she's seriously serious. Cut number 15.
We got to take this stuff seriously as you are, because you have been forced to have to take it seriously. The whole nation should understand.
Yeah. She's not very good at going off script. She's not even really good at being on script either. But when she's off
got
script,
to
she's
know
terrible.
by now. Somebody around her husband, the second dude, somebody has got to have told her by now, you can't keep doing this. It's really
the second dude. I like that term, the second dude. So the quote was, in case you didn't hear it clearly, we've got to take this stuff seriously as you are, because you've been forced to take this seriously. Seriously?
She is a verbal palindrome.
A verbal palindrome. Kamala Harris is a verbal palindrome. I think that gives her too much credit for having thoughts organized well enough. I mean, this is a person, again, who, when forced to speak extemporaneously, clearly is lost and starts filling it with all sorts of verbal tics.
She is a rhetorical U-turn. She starts a sentence, goes halfway in, and then comes right back out the beginning again.
So that's one form of silliness, right? There was another one from CNN's Allison Camerota, who actually usually is pretty decent at being able to manage a news broadcast. But this is, are gun checks like being a waitress? I didn't quite catch this. I didn't quite connect the dots here. Cut number 18.
I like that analogy, Steve, because I used to be a waitress. And for a while, we were told to run up the alcohol tab on customers who came in, because you got them to pay more that way. Then the law changed. And you couldn't serve somebody who you knew had been drinking, because they were killing people on the highway. And so once you recognize...
That's a little different, though.
I understand.
Allison,
none of these analogies are perfect, Steve. I get it.
Actually, I don't think you do get it. Actually, Allison, I don't think you get it.
Was she arguing that they need to disincentivize gun owners from upselling? I mean, I don't even get that. I understand it. I mean, and by the way, the law it wasn't so much that the law changed, it was that the places were getting sued for serving drunk people and then putting them on the road.
No, kid, you don't need an AR-15. You need a bazooka. That's what you need.
Right. I mean, I'm not clear as to how gun sales relate to being a waitress. And I don't think that she even made the sale with her folks there. And okay, so
I don't think she even convinced the Human League.
Well, we'll play that cut at the end, right?
We can.
Okay. Well, that much is true.
I don't know.
According to Allison Camerota, that much is true. She was working at a waitress at, I don't know if it was a cocktail bar. I think she was talking about a restaurant, but
that's about all of the analogy makes sense.
none of that analogy makes sense. Again, I'm not quite clear as to how being a waitress has to do with gun sales, but yeah, they don't supersize you. They don't ask you at the end, would you like to supersize that? Do you want fries? Do you want fries with that AR-15?
So every drink that you serve is a loaded firearm. Every drink.
Well,
every beer.
Yeah. Every beer is a loaded firearm, and we need beer control. We tried beer control, by the way. Didn't work.
Yeah, we tried it. We tried confiscation, didn't we?
We tried confiscation of alcohol. Didn't work. We tried, and it was actually popular at the time. And by the way, at least they did it constitutionally, right? They passed a constitutional amendment to bar the sale and transport of alcohol, not the consumption, but the sale and possession and transport of alcohol was barred by constitutional amendment. And it worked out so well that they passed another constitutional amendment about a decade later, repealing the other constitutional amendment. And this, to me, I mean, honestly, you hear people say, well, you can't do constitutional amendments. It's just too darn difficult to do constitutional amendments. You can't do constitutional amendments. Man, I'm telling you, if you can bar alcohol, and then it was 10 or 12 years later, repeal the bar on alcohol, my guess is that the Constitution can be amended through the normal process when there is a broad enough consensus to get it done. When we come back, Salena Zito joins us. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Don't go anywhere, America. Ed Morrissey will be right back. Let me, however, remind you that if you're going to buy gold this week after the 4th, you've decided, well, I'm done with this crypto bad news that Hugh has given me. Gold didn't do what happened to that. You know, and of course, it never does because gold is the universal's stable coin, if you will. Long before there was anything else, there was gold, and gold isn't going anywhere. At the start of the week, of course, gold was trading around $1,800. So it might be up a little bit, it might be down a little bit, but if you go to Birch Gold at hughgold.com, hughgold.com, you can get a free information kit on how to roll over a portion of your IRA into a Birch Gold administered 401k IRA that the IRS respects. It will be solid, actual physical gold and silver. That's what Birch Gold does. Or you can go and just text my name, Hugh, to 989898. That's birchgold.com. Don't forget as well, I've taken it with me, as I always take it with me. My relieffactor.com has gone to Ohio. It will be in Ohio for all the weekend until I come back here on Monday next. And Ed Morrissey, I don't know if he takes his relieffactor.com, but I sure did in the morning. I'm not going to take it now on camera for you because I'm in the middle of an airplane in LaGuardia somewhere. But relieffactor.com is what you need to make your day a wonderful one. Relieffactor.com. 1995, no inflation there. I'm sure Ed and tomorrow Kurt will be talking about Relief Factor, and they'll be talking about inflation. But inflation has not hampered Relief Factor's ability to get that starter pack to you. Still $19.95. I carry it in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega every single morning I take it. I got to be ready for a 10K in the middle of August, and I'm almost there. First 10K over the weekend in a long time since I did my face plant. I credit relieffactor.com. I encourage you to give it a try and to come right back here for more of Ed Morrissey. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com filling in for Hugh today. And joining me now is one of my good friends, Salena Zito from SalenaZito.com, contributor to the Washington Examiner, CNN, New York Post. And Salena is, of course, as you all know, has her finger on the pulse of America, and she has a new piece, or it came out this weekend at least, over at the Washington Examiner, arguing that we are moving in a center-right direction. Salena, is this really a realignment that we're looking at here?
Good morning. Yeah, this is a realignment, and realignments take forever, but they always seem to shock people that are involved in politics. But yeah, this realignment began obviously in 2016, right? We saw that with the big wow factor.
Right.
But since then, in 2020, people were paying attention to the big race, the Biden and Trump race. However, if you look down ballot, the country became way more conservative in state house races, state legislative races, Congress. The Republicans were supposed to lose 20 seats. They surprised, won 14 seats.
Right.
But that also then continued into 2021, not just with, again, the big ticket races of Virginia and New Jersey, excuse me, but also in municipal races all across the country, where row offices in counties all went Republican. Not all, but, there was a giant shift, even in a state like Pennsylvania, where county row offices, and that might not sound sexy or important, but it is. It tells you the direction of the country, and in particular in suburban areas in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, where many analysts thought were lost to the Republicans. The voters came back, and you see that with this upcoming wave in this cycle. And what I think is most interesting is these voters moved under enormous pressure. Enormous pressure. What do I mean by that? Our cultural curators in corporations, in the NFL, in Hollywood, in places like Disney, or their neighbors with all the signs of hate has no place here, and all those and all the protests. They still went conservative despite our culture telling them you're a bigot if you do. And I think that is, a very important thing to pay attention to. Now you look at the Supreme Court, and that is sort of a result of these voters moving to the right, because we now have constitutionalists in there who have on prayer, on the Second Amendment, on religious liberty, on life, have moved the country back towards where it rightly belongs, which is center right, which is where the country really is. And I think that is what, we are seeing. I mean, for years, prayer has, and anytime prayer was at a municipal meeting or at a football game, there was a trigger message by the activists that essentially took it out. Now that's gone. You can say a prayer at a football game if you're a coach.
Right, and I think you really hit on a key point here, is that the Supreme Court shift to the right really does reflect a realignment that's already been taking place for several years. Right. And to your point about certain offices, certain local offices not being sexy, before November 2021, you could have said the same thing about school boards. And after that, though, this has become really a central focus. Before the last couple of years, you could have said that about district attorney races. Now that the progressives have won a lot of those races through this progressive, decarceration project, the results of that are making those offices sexy again. And I think that part of this realignment is a realignment back to the local, right? And that's one of the reasons why it's a center-right movement. They're trying to get realignment back to the local.
Right, that's exactly right. And you saw this localism, and the seeds of this actually begin in 2009, 2010, and in that off-year election and in those midterms. But people didn't quite understand it. They thought it was a one-off. Actually, what's going to end up being, and I've written about this before, and they also saw the realignment that caused Trump to win as a one-off. What the one-off is going to end up being is Joe Biden.
Yep. That's exactly right. SalenaZito.com. Go there to get links to all the work that she's publishing these days. That Washington Examiner column is really good to take a look at, so make sure that you're following her on that. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Don't forget to sign up in the Hugh-niverse for more Hugh, more Dwayne, that's me, the After Show, and more. www.hugh-niverse.com.
Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I am away for the last 3 days of my summer vacation, and Ed Morrissey has been kind enough to drop in again from Texas, where it's, I think, 140 degrees, and sweat a little bit in his studio down south. He goes to the Dorn of the studios as opposed to the Winterfell of the studios where I'm hiring out. Go for it. Go for it. Thank you, Edward, for coming in.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of hotair.com, cooler than the other side of the pillow in Central Texas. From the relieffactor.com studios here. Great to be with you here. We've got still a lot of show left coming up. This hour, we're going to be talking with King Banaian of St. Cloud State University, one of our good friends, and also host of his own show on the Salem affiliate in the Twin Cities, KYCR. Talking a little bit about economics and recession. We're going to be talking about the markets with Brian Wesbury. So let's start off this hour talking about economics and the White House. And this White House is, of course, an utter mess on economics. They have performed just as strategically on economics as they have on, well, just about everything else, which is to say not at all. They have been buffeted by the winds of fortune, some of which they initiated on their own with the American Rescue Plan, others of which have been building up for more than a decade. We might talk with King about that a little bit. But also because of their own energy policies. Inflation was probably going to happen anyway. If you understand what the structural issues from the quantitative easings that began in 2009 or 2010 under Ben Bernanke, you knew that this day was coming. Thomas Honig warned about it at the time, that the day would come when we would unleash inflation again, thanks to asset bubbles and the rest of that free money and easy money create. But the American Rescue Plan touched this off. The energy policy, though, is making it worse because it is creating a supply crisis for gasoline inside the United States, which is, of course, a force multiplier for inflation, both gasoline and diesel, I should say, diesel especially. So rapidly rising gas prices began almost immediately when Joe Biden took office. The restrictions on production, well, not even just the restrictions on production, the signals that it sent to the capital investment necessary to expand production and refining made it clear that we weren't going to be able to keep pace with the demand as the pandemic came to an end. And so prices have escalated. They were escalating rapidly. Prices were up were about 60% higher in February of 2022 than they were in January of 2021, even before Vladimir Putin touched off the invasion of Ukraine. That hasn't helped. And in the 4 months since then, you would have expected an administration to adjust their energy policy to account for the issues that the invasion of Ukraine has created. But no. Joe Biden in his wisdom and in his administration have decided that the people that are really to blame are corporate greed. No, wait a minute, not corporate greed. Vladimir Putin. No, wait a minute, not Vladimir Putin. It's really just growth. No, that's not it either. It's gas station owners. And I mean, this is something that Joe Biden started talking about a week or two ago, trying to demonize gas station owners and telling them to lower prices, even though it would basically put them out of business. Karine Jean-Pierre continued with that theme yesterday. Let's go to cut number 8.
That are abroad.
Thanks, Karine. How did the president go from blaming high gas prices on Putin to big oil to small business owners now?
Well, here's the thing about that, Peter, is when you look at, as of this morning, when you look at the crude oil, and when you look at wholesale oil prices as well, they've declined about 15%. And so retail gas prices, however, have only declined just about 3% over the same time period as we have seen with the crude oil prices and the wholesale gas prices. And meanwhile, those same retailers are profiting, their profit have gone up about 40 cents, nearly 40 cents in that same period of time. So what the president is saying is that everyone along that chain, along that production chain line, needs to make sure that they're doing what is possible, their part in bringing down the cost for the American people. That is what we're asking. Consumers should not be the first to pay and the last to benefit.
Jeff Bezos says the president's tweet about this.
Do you really think that gas stations are raising their markup is 40 cents a gallon?
Of course not.
Does anybody honestly, truly believe that?
No. I mean, this is a highly competitive market. Most of these gas station owners, I think it's 55% of gas stations are single-owner gas stations. These are not owned by the big oil companies. I think less than 2% of gas stations in the United States are owned by oil companies. They're owned mostly by single-station owners, and then I think most of the rest of those are people who own 5 stations or less, right? So some people have accumulated multiple stations.
And they have maybe a 1% markup on gas. Where they make their money is on overinflated ho-hos, Twinkies, and ding-dongs.
Right. They make them up in the convenience stores or in the auto shops, right? Because some of these still are the older model where you had the mechanics that work in the shop and the pump gas, and it's the mechanics where they make their money, not the gasoline. The gasoline gets them into the station. Now, when prices are rapidly going up, yeah, there might be some gaps where you momentarily make a better profit than you normally would, but that gets eliminated almost immediately. And you can, all you got to do is drive down the street and realize why. I mean, I don't live in an area that's a real dense population, but there's a number of gas stations that are close by. They're all owned by different people, right? And when you look at them, they're all looking at the other gas stations too and trying to calculate their prices so they can be competitive with these other stations. Because if you're off by more than a couple of cents, people will flock to the one gas station and never go to the other. So it's a very competitive market. So if you have that kind of 40-cent gap, it leaves you plenty of room to bring those prices down when everybody else is bringing their prices down too. So if it existed at all, it probably evaporated within a day or two, and you're back down to the 1 to 2% profit range maybe on a gallon of gas for gas station owners. Now, bear in mind that of course that they pump some of them can pump 50,000 gallons of gas a day. So if your profit margin is 5 cents on a gallon of gas, well, you can do the calculation. That's still a pretty lucrative business. I mean, these are successful businesses for a reason, but it's not because they're charging some sort of gouging prices on this. And here's the part that really galls me. First off, the issue isn't a price problem, it's a supply problem. It is a supply problem with higher demand. We're restricting supply while demand is increasing. And the supply problem is completely self-imposed. It starts with Biden taking office, insisting that he's going to get us off of fossil fuels by the year 2030, which is, just 8 years from now. And imposing all sorts of restrictions on lease sales, on drilling, on expanding production, and on expanding refining. And now he wants all of those things to take place at the same time that they're trying to shut down the industry. And all of these things cost a lot of capital. I mean, billions and billions and billions of capital that you don't get back in a 2 or 3 year span. You're talking about a 10 to 15 year return on investment in some of these instances. Nobody's going to put that kind of money into oil production. Excuse me, I'm sorry. When you're 10 to 15 years out on getting a return on your investment, and the government is threatening to cut the industry off at 8 years, it's absurd. First off, the idea that we're going to get off of fossil fuels in 8 years is absurd anyway. But this is the reason why you don't get capital investment. It's the reason why you don't get an expansion of production. It's the reason why Joe Biden is going to go to Saudi Arabia and maybe Venezuela and beg for more oil. I mean, this is insane. And by the way, they're not going to get more of that. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about where we're not going to get more oil and where the oil we do have is actually going, because those are important things to note when they're starting to talk about pointing the finger at gas station owners and setting them up as scapegoats and essentially calling them unpatriotic for not lowering gas prices below the point where it cuts into their cost. And this is exactly the type of impulse that is going to create even more shortages. You're going to end up with gas lines all over again, because why? If you artificially lower prices in a high demand environment, you're going to run through your supply even quicker. And if you've got a supply crisis, that is no es bueno. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
The Love Train at the Hugh Hewitt Show. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Central Texas. We're on the Love Train here at the Hugh Hewitt Show. The White House is more on the demagogue and demonized train, especially when it comes to small business owners like gas station owners. We just got done playing this one clip from Karine Jean-Pierre blaming gas station owners for the entirely predictable outcome of the energy policy pursued by Joe Biden. Now, frankly, when a president goes after big oil, you kind of expect that. It's still demagoguery. You kind of expect that. Corporate greed. You know, when you're talking about a Democrat president, especially one enthralled to the progressive wing of his party, you kind of expect that. But when a president is intimating, if not outright accusing, small business owners of not being patriotic for selling their product at a very, very small profit margin because of his policies, because his policies make his life difficult, that goes beyond demagoguery. That really gets into cowardice. This is a president who won't fess up to the, like I said, the entirely predictable outcome of making it more difficult to produce supply in a high demand situation like a recovering economy from a pandemic. This is what you get. Everybody who looked at his energy policy knew this is what was going to happen. You're going to have gas prices rapidly go up. This is not complicated economics. This is Econ 101. And to blame small business owners for the entirely predictable outcome of Joe Biden's entirely idiotic energy policy is cowardice. And to the extent that his White House is participating in this, including Karine Jean-Pierre, I mean, this is really a despicable line of attack and a line of dodging responsibility. The buck used to stop at the White House. It hasn't stopped at the White House the entire time in the Biden presidency. Everything is always somebody else's fault other than Joe Biden. And to continue with that theme, let's go to cut number 4 to find out who will be the next contestant on the Joe Biden scapegoating game show. Let's go to cut number 4.
The G7, there's video of the French president running up to President Biden and relaying a message saying that the Saudis are about at capacity through the UAE. Did President Biden ask the French to ask the Saudis to pump more oil through the UAE?
I did not hear this conversation, so I can't speak to that conversation.
How did she not hear this conversation? It was flying all over social media.
It was all over social media, and in D.C., everybody knew that happened. Everybody
was talking about that. Everybody was talking about it. It was not just the Saudis, by the way, but also the UAE said they couldn't pump anymore. The Saudis aren't going to be able to pump anymore until at least next year. They're going to have to expand their production facilities to pump more oil, and they have to invest their money into that. They have plenty of money to do it, but they just haven't done it yet. And I suspect part of that is they're waiting to make sure that Joe Biden turns his back on Iran for good, rather than try to play footsie with the mullahs there and leave the Saudis twisting in the wind in that region. But if you don't like the Saudis for the next contestant on the Joe Biden scapegoating game show, let's go to cut number 5 because there's another good one here coming up too.
And then there's a Reuters report out this morning that says that more than 5 million barrels of oil that were released from the emergency oil reserves were exported to Europe and Asia last month, and some of it reportedly was actually heading to China. Is the administration aware of those reports? And does the president mind that some of this oil that was meant to ease pain for consumers is headed overseas?
I have not seen that report, so I would honestly have to go look into it and see what the truth is in that statement that you just laid out, and see exactly what's happening. I just have not seen that report.
Circling back,
this isn't even the first time or the first release from the SPR that has gone to China.
No. I mean, this was supposed to go to refiners to lower the price of gasoline here in the United States. That's what the release was supposed to be about. And you're right, it's not the first time we've sold that. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to salemnewschannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
Roller coaster. That's a good description of economics these days. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios in Central Texas. Joining me is my good friend King Banaian from St. Cloud State University, also on KYCR in Minneapolis, TwinCitiesBusinessRadio.com, where he has a Saturday morning show on all sorts of economic questions. And the big one, of course, is, are we tiptoeing into a recession here? King says... What else, King?
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about this now for a couple of weeks about, well, we're looking at this indicator, we're looking at that indicator, bond inversions, the Atlanta Fed, tracker and all that. There's all sorts of people, all sorts of indicators that people are using to say, we're in a recession, and you are a voice of at least calm, saying we're not there yet, but.
Right. The but's very important. I mean, there's all kinds of news coming in and things changing rapidly. It does seem like financial markets are changing their minds fairly rapidly, swinging from things are great to, oh my gosh, recession is around the corner here pretty soon. Ed, I think one of the things we probably should talk about is sort of how recessions are measured, who puts the date on them, when do they start and end, and so forth. So I think that because I think there are a lot of people who just want to say, well, I'm in one already, and I think that's mood affiliation more than it is actual economic science at this moment.
Well, and there's good reason for that. People's buying power is shrinking. You're seeing interest rates going up. It's going to make cars less affordable. It's going to make houses less affordable. People who are trying to sell houses now are starting to feel the pain of how that's going to impact their ability to sell. So, I mean, it might feel recessionary to people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the personal experience is the macro experience here.
Right, and certainly in different groups, I think it's the case that if you are somebody who actually was able to work through the pandemic in 2020, but you still got all those big checks, right, from stimulus, you probably are sitting on some savings, and as you look at the higher prices, you think that stinks, and you're not very happy about it, but you're spending the money anyway, and that still is going to say that still is translating into high demand going into a world where supply is constrained for a variety of reasons. And so that is not a recessionary signal. But if you're somebody who maybe was in an industry where you couldn't work and you now see these higher prices and they're eating and your savings are gone, it really does feel like things are tough. And I can certainly understand somebody in that situation thinking we're in a recession right now.
So what is a recession? I know that everybody has the popular definition in their head, 2 successive quarters of negative growth, I'm using scare quotes, of contraction, basically, in the GDP report. But that's not the real definition of recession, or at least it hasn't been for a very long time. Recessions are actually both more technical and more focused, or at least the definition of it is, and there's a specific process by which a recession is actually determined.
Right. So there's a group of economists, all volunteers, who are part of something at the National Bureau for Economic Research, which is a clearinghouse for lots of economic research. It's a nonprofit agency and organization, and they're called the Business Cycle Dating Committee, which doesn't sound like as much fun as dating for other things. And it's not as much fun, but what they do...
Do you swipe right or swipe left on a recession? I'm not sure.
Right. That's right. Right, so 12 to 5, I think it's currently about 14 economists who get together, and they look at their definition is a decline in general economic activity. And so they look at various markets, and so they're breaking it down. And the 4 major markets they're trying to look at is industrial production, which measures the manufacturing sector. They're looking at personal incomes, and they're also looking at employment. So they're looking at the labor market. So they look at labor markets, at manufacturing markets. They're looking at sales, so what's going on in the retail sector. They look at that as well. So those four measures, when all four of them or three of the four of them tip over, that's typically when when the National Bureau for Economic Research is going to say, I think that's a recession. Different countries do it differently. So, but in the United States, we're actually using this group of basically volunteer economists to do this work.
We are speaking with King Banaian of St. Cloud State University and Twin Cities Business Radio.com. That's KYCR in St. Paul, Minneapolis, Twin Cities Business Radio.com, where King has his show on Saturday mornings, 9 to 11 a.m. Central Time. You can also stream it. You know, and this was something that actually I've been writing about since the first quarter number came out. And by the way, we're at the end of this month, we're going to get the second quarter number out. That will be when you're really going to have to start doing a lot of explaining, because I suspect that number is not going to be very good. But when you looked at that contraction in the first quarter, it was really technical. The other parts it was really almost entirely based on a severe trade imbalance. The consumer spending was still up, not spectacular, but it was, I think, growth was 2.5%, annualized growth was 2.5%. Business investment was still up. Again, it was lower than it had been before, but it was still in positive territory. So what you were looking at in that minus 1.6% GDP contraction in the first quarter was really a technical result that probably didn't give us any indications of a recession at all. So I think that may just have everybody sort of focused on that, but everybody is focused on that. I mean, there's all sorts of talk about it in Washington. And part of the reason why is the anticipation of what the Federal Reserve is going to have to do to get inflation under control, because the administration isn't doing anything, like, for instance, revamping its energy policy to try to get oil prices down and gas prices down, get more gas supply into the market, which is the real issue here, which would have a positive impact on inflation if the administration would pursue those policies.
Well, yes, many of them would actually increase inflation rather than decrease inflation. And frankly, just selling it. And part of the problem, Ed, is, of course, we do have increased demand for U.S. exports of energy products, particularly to Europe, but around the world. And energy prices are just rising for a variety of factors, and we can cite the war in Ukraine as one of those factors. It's not the only one, though. There's just increased demand in a lot of places. So that's part of the problem. The Fed today is going to release its minutes from its meeting last time, where it increased rates by 75 basis points. And so we're all going to be looking in there to see, does this mean that we're going to get another 75 later this month? I think the answer to that, by the way, is yes, we will. And if you want to talk about why recession might happen, it's because a lot of people believe the Fed is going to raise rates so fast that we're not going to be able to avoid a recession, that all these other spending numbers are going to come down as a result. I think that's what I think it's, there are two things we've talked about. One, are we in a recession now? I would say no. Is there a recession in the next 12 months? Well, the chances of that now are approaching 50-50.
Right. I wanted to ask you, King, did you get a chance to see the report in the New York Times yesterday? The New York Times looked up whatever was remaining of Jimmy Carter's economic advisors who were not pleased with the way that Joe Biden was essentially copying their 1978, 1979 playbook and was trying to wave him off. This is not the way to go. This is not the way to go. And I thought that was rather remarkable, that first off, that these guys are still around. Good for them. They're still around. But secondly, that they're willing to say, look, you should have learned some lessons from the last time we were going through this, and this administration hasn't done that. You have to spend less money. You have to restrict federal spending. You have to get a lot of that debt under control, and there's energy policy issues in there as well. But I just found that remarkable. What did you think of the advice that these guys were giving Joe Biden?
Well, I think the most interesting piece of that advice was, hey, don't do what we say. Do what we say, not what we did.
Right.
Is the short version of that. And yes, this White House seems to keep trying to jawbone down price increases from producers, and exactly the wrong producers. We need more energy, and we're telling current energy producers you're charging too much. That's unlikely to encourage exploration, to be polite about it. The other thing to remember about the late 70s is that you ended up having the late 70s is what made Paul Volcker, who still has the reputation as the most inflation-fighting central banker in history. And he got that because he was stuck with the job all by himself. The Carter administration did next to nothing to help him. And Joe Biden, unfortunately, is not giving Jay Powell any help. And indeed, there was a press conference, you might remember, about 2 months ago now, in which Joe Biden said, Jay Powell, it's your job to take care of inflation. We respect the independence of the Fed, which means when the pain comes from a recession, if a pain comes from a recession, it's going to be entirely 100% blamed on the Federal Reserve. Joe Biden's already picked out his scapegoat, and his name is Jay Powell.
Yeah, but Carter could have done that with Volcker. Reagan could have done that with Volcker.
Well,
it said Carter. Well, yeah, kind of did, but I mean, in the end, it wasn't necessary for that because it ended up working out very well for Reagan in the end, right? I mean, I don't know that people don't elect Federal Reserve chairs. And by the way, Biden appointed Powell. You got maybe 30 seconds. I don't think that strategy is going to do much good.
I don't think the scapegoating will do him much good. It didn't help Reagan in '82 with the by-elections or the off-year
midterms.
elections.
Yep.
I don't think it'll help this time either.
King Banaian, TwinCitiesBusinessRadio.com, TwinCitiesBusinessRadio.com. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Ed Morrissey. It's Hugh again. Don't go anywhere, America. I may be traveling through LaGuardia, but Ed Morrissey will see you through the entire day. I do want to remind you, however, that you need to go to rockthewoke.com, a project of Job Creators Network. And we've never needed it more because we're into the election cycle. The election cycle is going to crescendo through to November. And rockthewoke.com is taken to the streets of America to remind people why they indeed need to replace Democrats at every level, why they need to put people who believe in markets and fiscal discipline in low taxes and pro-business measures everywhere in the United States. So you got to go to rockthewoke.com and see what Job Creators Network is doing right now. Been a great sponsor of this show for many years. Alfredo Ortiz was on last week. I encourage you, rockthewoke.com. Now, a few of you do it every day. I'd love to get 1,000 of you to do it today. Ed Morrissey will remind you about it as well, but rockthewoke.com. Don't forget as well, relieffactor.com. If you're just tuning in, you missed my first reminder last hour, but I've got it with me as I go to Ohio. Because even in the land where the water is clear and the air is always bright with hope, even where everyone never gets old and everyone flourishes, even in Ohio, you need relieffactor.com. Because Icarian and Kirkman, resveratrol, and Omega, they all combine together. Whether you're on vacation or you're working, whether you're back in your original hometown, or whether you are off in a faraway place, the last thing you should do before you leave is put the Relief Factor into the front seat of your car or into your luggage if you're flying. And if you're someone who's driving every day, I always recommend that relieffactor.com be in the car so that when you hear this, you don't have to slap your forehead. You say to yourself, I should have done that. Yes, you should have done that. Relieffactor.com, $19.95, no inflation there. 3-week starter pack. Give it a try. Relieffactor.com. Come right back. Ed Morrissey is buttoned up, ready to go for the second hour of today's program. And he'll be right back after this on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Curious about what you're missing in the Hughiverse? The After Show? 21 years of Hugh Hewitt shows on demand? Go to www.hughiverse.com right now, where it's only 99 cents to join for the first month. www.hughiverse.com.
Welcome back. This is the HHRS, the Hugh Hewitt Radio Show. It's fun to... never mind, I'm not going to try that. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios. Just digging Disco Day, as I always do, because they have the best bumpers. Adam has the best bumpers here on the Hugh Hewitt Show. But we got to go to one more Karine Jean-Pierre clip because this is just inexplicable. It's not even on economics, not even on energy. See if you can diagram out the logic pattern in this clip. Clip number 7.
What's the difference between President Trump not doing anything while the Capitol was being attacked and President Biden not doing anything while protesters, while the Supreme Court justices were under attack in their own homes with their families and with their children?
Well, there are two major differences here. First of all, our predecessor was very, we have said that his behavior on that day, on January 6th, was atrocious. The president has said that. And we are going to let the select committee, the January 6th select committee, continue to do their independent review of that, their hearing, and you guys all saw for yourselves. The American people have seen for themselves what our predecessor has done, his behavior and his involvement. So that is not the same. That is absolutely not the same. We are talking about what we saw on January 6th. We are talking about an attack on our democracy. We are talking about a very dark day.
Let's stop here for just a second. Now, the comparisons being made, in case you didn't hear the reporter's question, is why are we doing all of this over the January 6th riot at the Capitol? And in the meantime, the Biden administration won't enforce federal law in preventing demonstrators from protesting and intimidating Supreme Court justices in front of their homes. That actually breaks a federal law. So did the riot on January 6th, of course. The Department of Justice is investigating the one. They're not lifting a finger to stop the other. And you've got Karine Jean-Pierre doing some sort of weird tap dance that says, well, our predecessor this and our predecessor that, and this was bad, and it was an attack on our democracy. Well, the reason why you have 18 U.S.C. 1507, which is the federal statute that makes it a felony to demonstrate in front of a judge's house or an officer of the court's house, is because that type of intimidation campaign on the judicial process is also an attack on our constitutional Republican form of government, small r Republican. And Congress recognized this when they passed the law. The president that signed this into law recognized it at the time. And it doesn't just apply to the Supreme Court, it applies to federal judiciary in general. And it's not just in front of their homes, but it's also in front of their offices, not the Supreme Court, because that is a legitimate place for protest, but in law offices is what that is meant to law offices, private offices, that sort of thing, because it covers also officers of the court, not just bailiffs and clerks and that sort of thing. So this is a federal law that they are not enforcing, that this administration is not enforcing. This is an intimidation campaign, which is in essence what the January 6th riot was as well. It was an intimidation campaign intending to get Congress to interrupt its and stop its constitutional responsibility for counting the votes from the Electoral College. And I mean, I'm not making any excuses for that, because I think that was a terrible thing, and I think that certainly something that Congress should investigate, something that people should be prosecuted for. But in the exact same way, the people who are running these intimidation campaigns against the Supreme Court justices specifically to influence the outcome of their judicial process should have been arrested and prosecuted as well. It's against the law. It is against federal law to do that, and for good reason. There is no public opinion input in the judicial process. There's plenty of it in the legislative process. There's plenty of it in the executive process, and it's legit. There is no legitimate public sentiment input into the judicial process. The judicial process is about the application of the rule of law. That is not something that you hold public opinion polls on. And this is where a lot of the criticism about the Supreme Court in these recent decisions misses the mark. You had people saying, well, the Supreme Court isn't following public opinion. The Supreme Court is detached from the public. They're out of touch with the public. Well, they're supposed to be. It's the judicial process. It is not a legislative process. That is the point. That's the point that Samuel Alito was making in his majority opinion in Dobbs, which was that Roe v. Wade was an example of the court following a public opinion rather than actually ruling on the Constitution and the rule of law. So if you're going to prosecute the January 6 rioters, and I think you should, I think that's a really good idea because you don't want to encourage that thing from happening again. You've got to prosecute the people who are intimidating federal judges in front of their houses. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Stay tuned. We got a lot more left.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by The Matter of Life and Salem Now.
Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I am away for the last 3 days of my summer vacation, and Ed Morrissey has been kind enough to drop in again from Texas, where it's, I think, 140 degrees, and sweat a little bit in his studio down south. He goes to the Dorn of the studios as opposed to the Winterfell of the studios where I'm hiring out. Go for it. Go for it. Thank you, Edward, for coming in.
Thanks, Hugh. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com in the ReliefFactor.com studios in Central Texas, where it is still cooler than the other side of the pillow in more ways than one. It's even cooler today because we get to do disco music today on the Hugh Hewitt Show. You'll hear the disco music in the bumpers. Adam's doing a great job getting some of the classics out there. So this is the cool version of the Hugh Hewitt Show. I think I can declare that it is the cool version of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Now, you may be saying to yourself, disco? How old is this guy anyway? Well, and that's fair. It's a fair point. I concede the point. I am still, though, at least an order of magnitude younger than the guy who's in the Oval Office at the moment, and that's become a very big political problem for Democrats. A new Harvard-Harris poll yesterday showed, it came out yesterday, I think it was taken over the weekend or just before the holiday. I think it was the week before the holiday when they did the survey, shows that 60% of respondents are questioning or doubting, have doubts about Joe Biden's cognitive abilities in office. That includes, by the way, 27% of the Democrats in this sample have serious doubts about Joe Biden's cognitive abilities. And it's not hard to see why, because every time he's on television, every time he has to make a speech and has to deliver comments off script, it's clear that Joe Biden, who's never been the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree anyway, is struggling to keep up. And 64% think that he's too old for the job. Again, not difficult to see when you're, or not difficult to understand when you see how he's actually doing and how they're hiding him from one-on-one interviews, how they are shielding him from questions. All sorts of different indicators. In fact, 4th of July gave us another indicator. Let's go to cut number 1 just briefly. Do we have cut number 1? Maybe we don't have cut number 1.
Thanks.
Okay.
God bless America. Okay, and God bless America. Thank you. And God protect our troops. Thank you.
So normally the president would be the one to say God bless America. Apparently he passed the mic to Joe Biden, who then filled it in for him, and then he kind of came in on the back end of that. And by the way, that's the least of the issues with Joe Biden's presentation these days. And Joe Biden's been doing I guess you could say doing yeoman's work, trying to keep him corralled. Trying to keep him away from reporters. You had the Easter Bunny. This was what, 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago? The Easter Bunny at the White House egg roll had to block Joe Biden from talking to reporters in order to keep him away from having to answer questions. This is not a guy who's performing well, and it's coming across. 71%, by the way, in the same poll said he shouldn't run for a second term in office. And again, that included, I think, about 37% of the Democrats that were being surveyed in this. This is a huge problem for Democrats. It's one that the media largely doesn't want to talk about. But it still comes up in the media, and sometimes in surprising places. Yesterday, Pete Buttigieg, who's the transportation secretary for Joe Biden, was speaking with Fox's Neil Cavuto about pilots. There's a pilot shortage. And the question has come up is whether or not pilots, the mandatory retirement age for pilots is 65 years of age. And the question has come up is, that's a fairly old restriction, given that people are living longer, given that people are healthier. Does it make sense to keep that restriction, or should we adjust it, index it, if you will, a little bit for improving health? And Pete Buttigieg responded to this and ended up with a little bit more than he asked for. Let's go to cut number 11.
I know you oversee the FAA as well. There are worker shortages there. But when it comes to pilots, and I think the retirement age remains 65, should it? Would you be for increasing that to increase the pool of available workers then who could fly these planes that oftentimes they're begging to find pilots?
Look, I'm much more interested in raising the bar on things like compensation and job quality than lowering the bar on something like safety. And when you get to these training hours, the retirement age and those things, those are fundamentally safety regulations. The United States of America should be able to have a robust aviation system without watering down our expectations on safety.
Do you think you compromise safety with an old, I'm sorry, Secretary, are you compromising safety with a pilot older than 65? Because a lot of people say 65 is the new 55, and we have a president who's almost 80. So what's the big deal if we went up a few more years?
Look, that regulation is there for safety reasons. I haven't seen any piece of information or data that would suggest that the reasoning has changed. And so I'm going to look at other steps that are not affecting safety.
Ed Morrissey, in the broadcasting biz, there's an expression we say, which is "you got."
You got. I mean, and Cavuto. I mean, Cavuto really just tossed it in there, right? It's like, well, 65 is the new 55, and by the way, the president's 80 years old. What do you say about that? And people who are just like, well, this is all about safety. Well, the president is commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Now, I get that he's not actually riding in tanks or flying fighter jets, but this is a guy who's got the nuclear codes in his hand, right? This is a guy who has all sorts of different executive authority, a lot of which could be exercised unsafely.
Arguably a more stressful job than what a pilot's got to go through.
Arguably? Yeah, I'd say much arguably. It is a much more stressful job. I don't want to discount the need for experienced and well-skilled pilots, because that's always the case. You're never going to replace a pilot. A lot of that is automated, though. A lot of the types of tasks that were pilot dependent 30, 40 years ago have been automated in cockpits, in modern cockpits, right? And so there's possibly a little less stress than there used to be on pilots. Not that, and again, I'm not saying that's not stressful. That's not at all what I'm saying. But there's room to at least toy with the idea that maybe you could go to 67, 68 for some of these pilots if they wanted to, right? Most of these pilots are saying, you know what, at 65 I'm done. I mean, I don't care. I'm out. Right now they don't have that choice, though, and the reason why is because the FAA considers this to be a higher risk above the age of 65. Okay, that's fine. Now, voters are the ones who get to assess this. And, in truth, we've had two successive presidents who got elected in their 70s. So the voters have clearly decided that this isn't a safety risk until just very recently, when they've realized that Joe Biden is too old for this job. He's also too incompetent. That's a whole other issue. But he's too old, and he's got cognitive issues, which weren't really discussed in 2020, in the 2020 election. I mean, I think Trump may have tried to bring them up. The media wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, and they're still shying away from this. And I think that's the most remarkable part of this Harvard-Harris poll. Harvard-Harris is, by the way, it's not some sort of conservative outfit, right? This is Harvard University and the Harris poll, and so if you've got 60% of respondents saying that Joe Biden's cognitive issues are becoming a serious concern, even without the media even discussing it as an issue, I mean, that's a real problem for Democrats, especially when they're trying to consider what they're going to do in 2024. Joe Biden's insisting that he's going to run for another term in office, and you've got 71% of the respondents in this poll saying don't do it. 60% of them think that he's on the edge of some sort of dementia, and 64% of them think he's already too old for the job. How do you run a guy like that in 2024? There's no possible way that they could do that. Well, I take that back. there's a possible way they could do it. There's no possible way they're going to win with that. And so this is a real huge problem. And it's also a problem that the media isn't discussing this further. Clearly, it's on the minds of voters. And the media's refusal to discuss this in any significant way, while they were spending a lot of the time in the previous 4 years discussing Donald Trump's psychological condition and diagnosing it from afar, really speaks to the disconnect between media and their consumers. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
We're going to boogie oogie oogie till we just can't boogie no more. Music to my ears, literally. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today from the ReliefFactor.com studios in Central Texas. You know, we're talking about Joe Biden running for a second term of office in 2024. You've already started to see some Democrats organized to perhaps cut him off at the pass. One of them is Gavin Newsom, who was just trying to roll out a campaign in Florida to try to convince some Californians to move back to the state that he's run into the ground under his leadership. I want to play this cut with the caveat that there is another shoe to drop at the end of this. Let's go to cut number 16.
It's Independence Day, so let's talk about what's going on in America. Freedom, it's under attack in your state. Your Republican leaders, they're banning books, making it harder to vote, restricting speech in classrooms, even criminalizing women and doctors. I urge all of you living in Florida to join the fight, or join us in California, where we still believe in freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom to choose, freedom from hate, and the freedom to love. Don't let them take your freedom.
Paid for by Newsom for California Governor 2022.
Yes, because the primary experience in California for business owners and for residents is freedom. There's hardly any regulation or taxes in California, right? And by the way, it was California that was some of the school districts in California that was banning books like Huckleberry Finn and even To Kill a Mockingbird because of the language that was in both of those. So I'm not even sure where this is coming from, other than just being about abortion. And I'm not sure how unborn children would feel about living in California under those conditions. But I digress, because Gavin Newsom isn't just in Florida. Gavin Newsom is actually on vacation. There's nothing wrong with that. Governors get vacations just like everybody else does. But do you know where Gavin Newsom went on vacation? Dwayne, Generalissimo Patterson, can you guess where he went on vacation?
Well, I'm sure it would be a like-minded state that like Oregon or Washington State or maybe Hawaii.
You'd be wrong. You'd be wrong, Dwayne Patterson.
Well,
Gavin,
he'd have to go to a state. He's got to go to a state that he can legally travel to and not go against his own ban for civil rights reasons.
You would think that would be the case, Dwayne, but Gavin,
it's not like he went to Montana or something.
Bingo! He went to Montana, one of the 22 states that California forbids official business travel to because of its, quote, anti-LGBTQ plus policies, plus they're considering an abortion ban in Montana. He's on vacation in Montana,
who knew the French Laundry had a franchise program?
I think they must. There must be a French laundry in Helena, right? I mean,
must be.
Maybe
the
folks in Helena can let us know. Is there a French Laundry restaurant in that city? If so, I bet you it's fabulous. Gavin Newsom probably will tweet out about it, right? You think he's tweeting out about it?
I'm sure he will.
Actually, as Emily Hoven of I believe it's Cal Report noted late yesterday, Cal Matters. Emily Hoven reported that his office had been loath to disclose the location until now, and for good reason. This guy is a gigantic, huge hypocrite. I mean, this is a guy who was imposing mask mandates and indoor mandates on businesses while going maskless to the French Laundry in the early days of the pandemic. Now he's forbidding official travel to Montana in protest of the LGBTQ plus policies, and that's where he's spending his vacation.
Shuts the entire state down for a year and a half, closes Disneyland down for a year and a half, and then has the audacity to run ads in Florida as though he is Mel Gibson in Braveheart.
You know, why isn't he vacationing in his own state? I mean,
we have lots of places here. You
got Disneyland, for instance. If you don't like that, you can go to San Francisco. If you don't, nobody wants to go to San Francisco these days. I take that back.
Nobody wants to go to San Francisco these days.
Nobody wants to go to San Francisco. We'll scratch that one off the list. But there's some lovely places along the coast that Gavin Newsom could have vacationed at. Instead, he went to Montana. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, definitely not in Montana or California. We'll be right back.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to salemnewschannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
ABBA! Well, you had to get at least one ABBA cut in there. I appreciate what Adam's doing there, getting those disco cuts. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, rocking to the hits of the 1970s here on the Hugh Hewitt Show from the ReliefFactor.com studio. And I just want to take a moment here to say that, I hate to say I told you so. No, that's not true. I love to say I told you so. Pope Francis isn't retiring. He is not going to follow Pope Benedict into emeritus status, at least not at this point in time. And the idea that he was going to do that was always a lot more about media speculation and folly than it was about actual resources. And the reason why I know this is not because I'm just a hugely smart guy, but it's because I follow hugely smart sources. And one of the best when it comes to what's happening at the Vatican is Francis X. Rocca. He's a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, longtime Vaticanista, who's coming to us from Rome this morning. It's afternoon where he's at, but Frank, great to have you with us today.
Ed, great to be here. Thanks so much.
So, Pope Francis gave a one-on-one interview to Reuters to basically declare what informed people already knew, that this is not a guy who's looking to retire anytime soon. He just rolled out his reform plan for the Curia, which is not the time to say, okay, well, here's the plan. I'm going to step away now. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. He still leaves the door open. He says,
right.
As he said a few days earlier to an Argentine news agency, he said, only the Lord knows, and then he said he would step down if he ever felt that he couldn't do it, but no, he's not planning to do so at the end of August.
And I mean, you'd know this better than I would, but I mean, there's been all sorts of adjustment issues having two popes, right? You have Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, who's still around and apparently still in good health, who did step down because he felt he couldn't do the job any longer. But that's been a terribly complicated situation at the Vatican, and I think that certainly Pope Francis understands that and has experienced that, personally. I mean, he's had to deal with that situation as well. It's been at least a locus of some conflict, and I don't think that he'd be too keen to rush into a situation where suddenly you've got three popes. I mean, I think that would be something that he'd want to avoid at this point in time. What is your read on that situation?
Well, a lot of people agree with you. I personally don't think he would let that stop him. He said at the first year of his pontificate, when he was down in Brazil, he was speaking to some Argentinians, I believe. He said in Spanish, "Hacer lío," make a mess. That's probably practically the motto of his pontificate. And I honestly don't think that if he thought it was time to retire, I think he would shrug and say, okay, so there'll be two Pope Emeriti, deal with it. That's the way he's done. He's been very disruptive. So I personally, but a lot of people agree with you that they think that would give him pause. I don't think he'll retire because I think he's too attached to the job. I don't think I think he, I can't imagine him retiring, frankly, unless he were truly incapacitated. Pope Benedict felt his strength wasn't up to it, but he's still with us. The Pope Francis, maybe if he had some terrible stroke or something and he couldn't function, but I wouldn't expect him to retire. I expect that he'll sooner burn out, as a colleague of mine said, than retire, because of the pace, the terrific pace at which he continues to operate, even though he's frequently been in a wheelchair recently.
Yeah, and Frank, I think that that's an interesting point too, because I think that in the beginning, well, not just the beginning, but through several years of St. John Paul II's pontificate, he seemed to be thriving in that role. I mean, he really did. He was vital, and this is before the Parkinson's really began to wear on him. Did a lot of traveling, did a lot of media, made the pontificate perhaps the most significant it had been in terms of world affairs than it had been in quite a while. And I get the sense that Pope Francis is, certainly not in the same way, but is also still very vital in this, and still is very much engaged in this job, which is another good reason, as you just pointed out, that he probably wouldn't want to step down from it. I mean, I don't see him slowing down. I know that he's had a knee problem that's put him in a wheelchair, but he's still traveling. He's still engaging. He's still kind of talking off the cuff, which is one of the unusual aspects, or at least different aspects of this from the previous two pontificates.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the other day, on a Saturday morning, his official schedule alone, only for the morning, included 4 private meetings, separate private meetings, and 3 speeches to 3 different groups. And then that's not to talk about the afternoon unofficial schedule, which is usually very packed. He does lots of things. Like, for example, when he met Elon Musk the other day, he did that in the afternoon. It wasn't on his official schedule. He's constantly working, writing, making phone calls. It's absolutely astonishing. The man is 85 years old. And whether you like what he's doing or whether you dislike it or whether you have mixed feelings, he's a phenomenon in that way. Now, it's true that his knee problem has slowed him down. We're supposed to go to Canada in the last week of this month with him, and if you look at the schedule, it's much, much more limited than usually on these trips because he just going to have trouble moving around. But otherwise, he's certainly not slowing down.
We are speaking with Frank Rocca, Francis X. Rocca on Twitter, at Francis X. Rocca, Wall Street Journal, veteran Vaticanista, a great resource. If you're not following him on Twitter, you should be following him right now, especially if you have any interest in what's happening at the Vatican. And you mentioned travel, and this is another issue. I don't want to say issue, but it's another topic that's come up, which is whether or not he's going to travel to Moscow and Kyiv in an attempt to intercede in the war there. This has come up a number of times. He's gotten some criticism for not being a little bit more decisive, let's say, on the side of Ukraine, who was very clearly the aggrieved party here in this invasion. But Francis is trying to keep the traditional Holy See role of mediator open here. And he did mention, I think it was in the Reuters interview, that he is still trying to work out a trip where he can go to both Moscow and Kyiv. And he wants to do Moscow first because he said that would be the proper order. Does that sound like it's coming together? It sounded like it might be a little closer or a little bit closer to fruition than it had been over the last couple of months.
Well, his language was a bit ambiguous, as of so often, but he said it was possible that he could go to Ukraine, but that he wants to go to Moscow first. And today, the Kremlin kind of threw some cold water on that. They announced that there have been no substantive discussions regarding any such a visit. Sounds like from their end they're saying there's no progress toward anything like that. It's pretty clear that the Russians have very little interest in him visiting or in him playing a mediating role. And as you say, he's sort of made that the condition because the Ukrainians would love to have it. And in fact, the Ukrainian ambassador the other day tweeted that, look, the Pope has to accept that the Russians are not going to let him come, so he might as well just come to us. Which they would love to have, but he won't do that because if he does that, it'll be seen as taking sides, and it will just anger the Russians. So I think he'll continue to offer himself in that way, but for various reasons, I just think it's very unlikely that Russia would ever want the Pope of Rome to be the mediator.
Right.
The Russian Orthodox Church wouldn't want that either, probably. Now, it might be more realistic that he meet the Russian Patriarch, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, in September in Kazakhstan on the sidelines of a ecumenical event, interreligious event, I think. But if the Patriarch has decided he's not too irritated by the Pope's finger-wagging comment that he shouldn't be Putin's altar boy. But I think the Russian Orthodox Church has an interest in having pictures of him with the Pope and everything. It sort of gives him a certain respectability at this moment. So maybe that will happen.
Frank, I was speaking with former Ambassador Frank Rooney, I think it was a few days ago. It was right before the holiday. And he was very frustrated at the Vatican's lack of action on the Russian-Ukraine conflict. He was saying that he felt that the Vatican should be weighing in more heavily on this and using its diplomatic power to force Russia into talks. Do you get a sense that there is any of that frustration within diplomatic circles at the Vatican or within the Vatican itself at the moment, or do you get the sense that this is really just Pope Francis's show and everybody is following along with that?
Well, I know that some people are frustrated that the Pope doesn't speak more clearly against Russia and censure Russia more in a sort of unqualified way. And there are people even within the Vatican who are troubled by the Pope's suggestions that, well, maybe NATO provoked Russia.
Right.
I mean, he's been very clear that he thinks the invasion is terrible and that his sympathies lie with the Ukrainians. But then he doesn't. I mean, a couple of times he has uttered the word Russia or Putin. I think only in informal remarks in interviews and press conferences, not in actual official statements. But his basic stance is this is a terrible thing that has happened, but and let's stop it. But the way to stop it is not wars, which kind of raises the question about whether he thinks Ukraine has a right to defend itself. I think he has said in some way that it does, but he really is not crazy, clearly not crazy about the idea of arming Ukraine more. So it kind of adds up to a kind of position of impartiality or neutrality.
Francis X. Rocca from the Wall Street Journal, thank you so much. Be sure to follow him at Francis X. Rocca. Be sure to read what he writes. That's how you stay informed about what's really happening at the Vatican. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Ed. Hey, America, if you're buying a house, and apparently a lot of you are, in fact, there are now rent bidding wars. Better to bite the bullet and go get a house and do a purchase of a house, a small house, whatever you can afford. So you ask yourself, how much can I afford with a house? Well, you'll see some online calculators. Don't believe them because they don't know your credit rating and you don't know your credit rating and you don't know what your net worth qualifies you for. But you know who does? AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian have been doing this for decades. In tight markets like this one or in easy money markets like the last 5 years, all you have to do is go to AndrewandTodd.com or call 888-888-1172, 888-888-1172, and you will find there all the tools that you need to figure out how much money you can afford to put into a house, and you'll get a pre-qualifying letter. So no screwing around. When you want to buy a house, you'll have a letter from Andrew and Todd that says, we will underwrite this loan up to X thousands of dollars. AndrewandTodd.com. Call them today, 888-888-1172. And don't leave home without it. I didn't. I took my ReliefFactor.com with me to Ohio for these 3 days. I'll be back on Monday, but I've got ReliefFactor.com with me. I'll be padding around the old town. Slower than I was when I left at age 22, because it's only been 44 years. But I'm going to be doing it. People are going to say, why are you still doing that? And I'm going to say, because I want to be coming back in another 22 years, and that's ReliefFactor.com's job. Icarian and curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. You know these are natural ingredients, no drugs at all. What they do is they help the body's natural anti-inflammatory system keep you in the game. Whatever your game is, whatever your sport is, whatever your exercise preference is, whether it's walking, trundling, running, or sprinting, whether it's the Peloton or kayaking or anything in between, whatever you're doing, including just reaching for the peanut butter, ReliefFactor.com ought to be a part of it. Go and get your ReliefFactor.com right now and take it. And if you haven't got it, go to ReliefFactor.com and get your starter pack for $19.95. Ed will be right back to wrap up the last half hour of today's show right after this.
Curious about what you're missing in the Huniverse? The After Show? 21 years of Hugh Hewitt shows on demand? Go to www.huniverse.com right now, where it's only 99 cents to join for the first month. www.huniverse.com.
Jive Talking. We're going to talk about some jive talking on abortion right now. I'm Ed Morrissey of hotair.com, filling in for Hugh from the relieffactor.com studios here in Texas. Democrats have been trying to use the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe as a way of, I guess, energizing their electoral base. It isn't working, but they're giving it the good old college try, almost the good old academia try. Let's go to cut number 13. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy trying to frame this as a war on women. Where have we heard that before? Cut 13.
I mean, who could blame them? God bless America. We still are, let's not forget, the greatest nation on earth, but war has been declared by a right-wing Supreme Court bloc against American women. And by the way, they have likewise allowed us to overnight become a lot less safe due to concealed carry gun laws. And look at the tragedy that happened yesterday in Highland Park. So we are a great nation, but we are in challenging, troubled times right now. And women especially are paying a huge price.
Stop.
That's about all of it anyway, right? I mean,
that's pretty much all of it. So just the gun stuff there, the little throw-in. We saw what happened here and the nation's concealed carry law.
None of those incidents had anything to do with concealed carry.
Did that shooter have one of those concealed carry permits to put his rifle in his holster?
No, he didn't. It had nothing to do with concealed carry. As far as we know, neither did the one in Philadelphia, although they haven't arrested the suspect in that one either. Concealed carry, where shall issue permitting regimes have been put in place, which is 43 states, even prior to Bruin. There wasn't any appreciable uptick. There wasn't any uptick at all in gun violence, and the people who actually got permits were extremely law-abiding with them because they had an investment in it. So I mean, it's just an absurd statement. It's a non sequitur, right? I mean, this is war on women, war on suburbs, et cetera. It's not working, though, Dwayne. This is the thing. It's not working because they've been trying to do this since the leak of the Dobbs decision in early May, and it hasn't impacted turnout. It hasn't impacted the results of primaries.
Nancy
and in
Pelosi
polling,
thought this was a game changer. She thought this.
Everybody on that side did. Everybody just assumed that, they're going to overturn Roe and you're going to have a voter revolt. The White House assumed that. And the voter revolt never showed up. Why? Because, A, the electorate is split on the issue anyway, and neither party actually represents the broad middle of the country when it comes to abortion. And B, it's not a priority for them in this midterm election. Right now, inflation, the economy, shortages, crime, those are priorities in this election. I mean, it's as if they have been asleep or trapped in their own bubble and just haven't been talking to voters at all. It's stunning, Dwayne.
If you look at the Monmouth poll and it listed out all of the different topics that people view as their most important issue to them, the top four of them are inflation, gas prices, which is inflation, food
right,
and clothing costs, which are inflation. I mean, the first four things are all economic related.
Right, it's all
related.
economy, right?
And you add up those percentages, and it's like 65-70%.
Yep.
That's what the Republicans are trying to win over because that's the issue that Republican candidates are talking about.
How many people said abortion? 5%.
5%.
And this is after wall-to-wall media coverage for the last 2 weeks at least, but really since the leak, right? Since the leak in early May. Wall-to-wall media coverage about the upcoming war on women and abortion rights, et cetera, 5% of people are prioritizing that.
The Democrats are trying to run on abortion, on same-sex issues or civil rights, if you want to lump it into one thing, and climate change. That's kind of their big three, right?
That's it.
And that's reflected. That's reflected
don't care about them.
That's reflected in this Monmouth poll as 5%, 1%, and 1% that people care about. So the Democrats are trying to win over 7% of the current electorate, according to Monmouth.
Well, and if you're a part of that 5% who are saying abortion is the most important issue, you're already voting. They're turning out people who are already going to vote anyway. And so, I mean, they're not speaking to people about their daily lived experience. I've been saying this now for weeks, maybe for months.
They're not reflecting what the country cares about right now. If you're not talking economics, people aren't listening to you.
You know what the country cares about right now, Dwayne? Is that you and I are going to do this all over again tonight on the Hughniverse. HUGHNIVERSE.com, the troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt
exactly like
fans.
this, except I will be leading the dance, and it'll be a whole new set of whole new flight of cuts.
Yeah, because we're going to get all the cuts from later today, so you got to tune into this. You got to be a member of the Hughniverse to do it. HUGHNIVERSE.com, and join us up, and we'll be starting at 8 p.m. Eastern time and ending when I fall asleep. I'll probably fall asleep in the middle of the show. Tune in for that. That'll be really fun to watch. So make sure you're tuning in for that. The Hughniverse. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by The Matter of Life and Salem Now.